Thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Steve Jagger. I graduated from Vancouver College in 1996, and I'm the co-president of the Alumni Association along with Mark Reed. The Vancouver College Alumni Association is a member-driven organization aimed at bringing all alumni together. We run the annual alumni golf tournament, the Irish Christmas lunch, a fishing derby, hockey game, basketball, and much more. But with the COVID-19 situation, all of our normal activities are either canceled or postponed. Most of them are going to be canceled. So we decided we would set up a webinar series to take advantage of the internet, to bring alumni together from around the world and listen and engage with interesting alumni across a whole bunch of different topics. This is our second event. The first one we had Christian Covington, who plays in the NFL, and Pete Diakowski, who used to play in the CFL, doing the interview. A quick note on how the tickets work. We've been selling tickets for $10. 100% of that money is going to support Vancouver College alumni-owned restaurants. So there's 2 restaurants today that are being supported with the funds that came in. One is Pink Elephant and the other one is Heirloom. The idea is that we'll buy gift certificates from those restaurants with this money. That gives the restaurant some money today, and we will sit on those gift certificates and use them as prizes at the golf tournament or something next year. Before I introduce our guests, I wanted to let you know that you can ask questions anytime via the chat function in Zoom. It'll go directly to me. Not everybody sees your question if you don't want. And I'll ask them after Aidan's done his piece. So with that said, let me introduce our guests. So Aidan Sullivan is going to be doing the interview today. Aidan's a grad of 1996, is an expat with 15 years experience in China as a financial advisor, venture-backed entrepreneur, angel investor, and management consultant. He is currently based in Shanghai and is the managing director China for Canadian merchant bank FM Resources. Next up, we've got Rob LeBlanc. Rob graduated in 2001. He's an experienced early-stage venture capital investor, social entrepreneur, and corporate finance practitioner currently living in Johannesburg. Having more than a decade of consulting, transacting, and entrepreneurial experience across North America, Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, Rob has developed a unique expertise across SME venture capital lifestyle. Rob got his BCom from McGill, his MBA from Harvard, where he was named a Baker Scholar. Prior to that, Rob was selected 40th overall in the 2005 CFL draft and won the Grey Cup in 2005 in his rookie year. And finally, we've got Suneel Gokhale, graduated in 1996 as well. He's the founding partner of Venture Souk. He's currently living in Dubai. Previously, he was the senior legal counsel to the Abu Dhabi Investment Council, a large sovereign wealth fund based in the UAE, advising on global M&A, investment fund, and capital markets transactions. Prior to this, Suneel practiced in the corporate group of Allen and Overy's Abu Dhabi office and at Blake Castles in Grayton in Toronto. Suneel has a JD from the University of British Columbia, a Master's of Science from the London School of Economics, and a BA from McMaster University. So with all that said, thank you guys for making this happen, and I will hand it over to Aidan to take us from here.
Morning, gentlemen, and Semper Fi. Hope you're all doing very well wherever you are in the lockdown. Great to catch up with all you, and looking forward to hearing what Rob and Suneel have to say. So Steve gave a little bit of a background there, but if you guys don't mind, just quickly, we'll start with you, Rob. Let us know where you're living, how long you've been there, and what is your family situation there?
Cool, pleasure. I guess speaking of family situation, I need to start by just being put on the record that I'm shocked that my dad's on the call. I didn't know he could use Zoom. This is a first. So hi, Dad. It's hard enough to track you down in normal circumstances, so it's ironic that you're on this. But on that note, I'm in Johannesburg, South Africa. I've been here for 8 years now, moved down in 2012 after my MBA. And I'm married with one son who's almost 2 and another baby on the way. My wife's about 20 weeks pregnant now.
Oh, wow, nice. Suneel?
Hey, much like Rob, I noticed that Taj Singera and my brother Sandeep are both on the call, who I didn't think could use them well. So what up, guys? I've been living in Dubai for about 9 years, married with a young son, about 2.5.
Awesome. And just in terms of getting a little bit of context in terms of Vancouver College and your experience at the school, Suneel, what year did you arrive at Vancouver College?
I arrived in grade 8.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, and Rob?
Same here, grade 8 for
Okay.
high school.
All right, excellent. And Rob, in terms of your 5 years of high school experience at Vancouver College, what would you say would be your fondest memory?
So there's a lot, but I would say if I had to pick one, it's probably sort of Saturday afternoon football games in the fall. And that's both being there and playing, but also I grew up just down Hudson Street, actually, a short walk from O'Hagan Field, and my dad used to take us over there from as young as I can remember, so 4, 5, 6 years old, and watching the Irish play. So and hearing the whistle even from my front yard down the street is a memory that comes to mind.
Awesome. And Suneel, yourself, do you have a fondest memory in mind from your experience at Vancouver College?
Yeah, I think just playing ball obviously was a big part. Basketball was a big part of my life. Particularly in high school, and so just hanging out with the fellas from the team, and just the camaraderie and all that, and everything associated with basketball is pretty great memories.
Cool. So in that respect, do you guys have a favorite a teacher or a coach that you could single out? Suneel, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think favorite teacher, I liked Mark Schmiegel a lot. I know I only really had him for a couple classes in grade 9, I think, but he was a good guy, and I liked him, and he was pretty funny. In terms of coaches, Vito Pasquale was definitely my favorite. I liked Vito a lot, and he was also just kind of real and spent a lot of time with him. So yeah, I think those two stick out in my mind.
Excellent. And Rob, yourself, do you have any specific teacher or coaches that stick in your mind of your experience at the school?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think to pick up on Suneel's point, as a student athlete, I probably over-indexed to coaches and certainly coaches that did double time in the classroom. So Mr. P definitely stands out. But also on the basketball side, Mr. Corbett as well. He taught me grade 12 math as well as coaching me through basketball. So great relationship there. On the football side, Mr. Howie and certainly Mr. Burnett, who's still there. If I had to keep it purely to academics and I had to pick one, I'd probably say Brother Newman, who's obviously no longer with us, but also Mr. Frere taught me calculus, and then English, Mr. Davenport and Mrs. Field for sure. Were instrumental in my, call it, academic development as opposed to athletic.
Okay, great. So kind of maybe switching gears a little bit in terms of, both of you have lived in several cities around the world, and obviously being an expat and being far away from home takes a certain amount of, let's say, courage and a sense of adventure. So I'm curious if there's any classes or teachers or any experiences at the school that you think stoked that, let's say, it's sense of adventure. Rob, maybe start with you.
Sure. I mean, I guess I might bucket it into academic and sports again. I think on the sports side, I think traveling as an athlete at BC was really cool, whether it's basketball or football, but particularly like cross-border trips. In my grade 11 year, we went down to San Diego and played football down there against a big 4A California school. And I thought at that age, it was pretty cool to get to travel to play sports. And that stuck with me as a longer term ambition, which I was lucky enough to have turn out. And then more formative probably on the academic or leadership side, my grad year coincided with the year 2000, which was also a Jubilee year for the Catholic Church. And so the Pope at the time called a World Youth Day in Rome, and the Christian Brothers put together a big delegation. They sent representatives from Christian Brothers schools from all over the sort of English-speaking world. So I was selected amongst a group of 6 guys from BC in my year who went over to Dublin for a leadership conference with all those Christian Brothers delegates from, you know, as far away as Tanzania, Australia, etc. And then the whole group of us went to Rome for the World Youth Days and the sort of papal Jubilee Mass, which was an incredible adventure and probably a little bit off-piste or certainly off curriculum, you know, having a few fun all-nighters in Rome at the end of that experience with those other 5 guys was definitely, you know, you watch the sunrise over Rome after you know, extracurricular activities when you're 17 or 18 out for the night was, you know, stoked in me a sense of adventure for sure.
Very interesting. Suneel, do you have an experience that you could share in that light?
Yeah, I don't know. I think, you know, living abroad, you know, never really traveled much as a kid, and, you know, during our high school years, aside from, you know, obviously, you know, I think one trip that, and I don't know if it led to, you know, decisions to live abroad, which encompass a bunch of different things. But, you know, we in my grade 11 year, we got to travel with the basketball team to Houston. I think Mr. Singera was on that trip as well. You know, I think that was kind of the first time traveling really without family and just kind of being with your buddies and, you know, hanging out and, I don't know, going to Hooters twice in one day, maybe. But, you know, I think, I think, you know, really, I think living abroad is a decision that encompasses not just whether you like to kind of be in different, you know, live in a different city, but it's, you know, your sense of adventure and exploring new things. And that came, I think, a little bit later in life, probably for me. You know, I think high school had a little bit to do with it, but I think that side really took hold. You know, I think when I moved to London for a year to do my master's is when I got to see, and I'd never really been to Europe before, got to see life over there and wanting to, you know, living in a very, very cosmopolitan city like London for that time, you know, made me want to, you know, check out, you know, the rest of the world. And it's how I kind of made decision after decision to land in a place like Dubai. Awesome.
So it's interesting that, you know, both of you have touched a couple times on your athletic experience in high school. You're both very successful athletes at the school. You know, in the context today, we're discussing both kind of an expat experience and also where you guys have landed in venture capital. You know, venture capital by virtue requires a, you know, very high risk tolerance. A lot of patience and teamwork. So I'm curious if, you know, there were lessons that you guys learned, be it on the court or the field or the track, that you use in your everyday life where you guys are at right now. Suneel?
Sure, yeah. So, you know, I think, you know, I certainly didn't have the level of success that Rob had post high school in terms of athletics. So, you know, you learn a bunch of stuff when you're playing in team sports when you're younger that you kind of don't really think about in terms of skills that you're building for something that will last the rest of your life. And then you got to go to university, and then you start working, and now, you know, running a business, and so you pick those things back up, and they kind of come naturally to you. And you don't even realize like where you actually pick that up. But, you know, I think if there was kind of a couple of things that I think stood out from playing sports at college was, I think, you know, teamwork obviously, but not just like working with a team, but actually how to manage different personalities and characters, which comes out in business a lot. I'm sure Rob can attest to that. You know, in any organization, you've got different types of folks, and you know, working and sort of playing team sports helps you manage those personalities, I think, a little bit better. And I also think, you know, just resilience in like the up and down of a game or the up and down of a season. You know, things can go bad and come back and keep doing that. You know, oftentimes over, you know, many times over the course of a game or a season. And you learn to pick, you know, you learn to deal with the highs and the lows and how that manifests itself over, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And as we move through our career. So I think, you know, I think those are two of the things that I think stand out in terms of experiences from sports that I was able to translate into a business career.
Interesting. And Rob, as we heard earlier, you had the pleasure of playing on a championship CFL team. Obviously, very heightened level of intensity and professionalism there. Were there aspects that you took out of that experience that you apply in your everyday life?
Yeah, I think for sure. But despite the level increasing, I don't think the fundamental lessons changed much. I think Suneel's points are spot on when it comes to just knowing how to be a good teammate and learning intrinsically how to rely on others to win, and also step up and play your role when it's your turn to perform so that the team can win. Those are sort of constants across all team building and sort of high performance organizations, like regardless of setting, even if it's in sports. And I think that's true universally. And I think that equanimity as well that you cultivate as an athlete, learning to deal with, even getting beat on a certain play and coming back the next, or losing a game and coming back the next, or having a bad season and coming back the next, is all something that builds character and resilience. But I think maybe to shift the perspective a little bit, I also think it offers some lessons through the investor lens. So when you think of backing concepts, backing teams, and sort of like picking winners, I think there's a couple things that stand out from some of the early fundamentals drilled into us at VC. I can think of many a defensive drill in basketball where we had to just sit in a defensive stance for like what seemed like 25 minutes. And that's the notion of just perfect practice makes perfect. So we used a theme that resonated throughout my time at VC playing in all sports, was that we practiced harder than we actually had to play most of the time against most teams that we competed against. And I think that's true. You mentioned venture capitalists or early stage investors having a huge risk tolerance. I think that's true in some levels because the magnitude of the bets they take are big and the probabilities are low. But I also find early stage investors are actually some of the most risk averse people I've met, all in all. And it's just that they're incredibly calculated or practiced in the risks that they do take. So I think that idea of preparing diligently and sort of practicing harder than you have to play translates a lot into an investment process and investment decision making. And then the other is probably just something learned by playing myself, and realizing my own limitations as an athlete, but also watching others excel for reasons that were beyond my grasp. It's just that there's some things you just can't coach, and there's an expression, you can't coach speed. And I would add, you can't coach work ethic or attitude. And those are some things that are just intrinsic in athletes. And I think you find that in people you work with, and particularly people you invest in. And so I tend to gravitate towards those people that are already naturally fast and already naturally hard workers, because more often than not, you're not going to be able to influence those behaviors over time. So it's good to start with people that, to build a game-changing organization, you got to be able to run the 100-meter sub 10. And you're not going to take like a 12 or 13 second 100-meter guy and, through some brilliant investment or intervention, speed them up by 3 seconds. So you look for that like natural talent, I guess, by default. And that's something I guess I learned opposite in sport, because I realized very quickly at the CFL level, I wasn't that guy. And I couldn't coach or work my speed into anything greater. So had to sort of stick with what I could do. But on the investing side, looking for those naturally brilliant guys that are already quick is really helpful.
Interesting. So after having the opportunity of playing with the quickest and some of the best out there on the field, you then went to one of the quickest and fastest and best business schools in the world, and working with elite individuals on, say, another level, and then from there you went directly to Johannesburg. So maybe in terms of the segue, was it something that you saw in your studies, or something that maybe an experience you had, or an interest, or what was it that took you from grad school to Johannesburg?
Well, I think it was a desire to get into a few things. I guess something that's really pertinent to my time at VC is sort of one of the themes that's informed all my career choices, which is one of paying privilege forward. So I think the notion of sort of servant leadership that you're exposed to at Vancouver College, and particularly the sort of role model in Christ in particular is one of using what gifts you've got to the greatest possible benefit. And so that's something that's always informed my choices. And so that's what drew me to sort of social enterprise and impact investing, was to use some more hardcore corporate skills to try to make people's lives better. And that altruism or sort of sense of purpose beyond myself has been something that resonated throughout sort of my choice to go to my MBA and then what I did after. And the other is, I'm always fascinated by not just sort of paying privilege forward, but building bridges. I love helping people from other parts of the world or from different cultures or who speak different languages see the value that's on the other side of sort of a wall that often keeps people separated. So I was interested in this idea of connecting different pockets of value and different perspectives that people might have. And then the last is just exploring frontiers. Why I love startups is a little bit like why I love playing sports or getting out in the outdoors, is you are trying to like sort of blaze a trail commercially that no one's ever been able to figure out before. So all those themes sort of informed myself wanting to do something sort of from an impact perspective in uncharted territory after B school. So the question was what, I guess. And I guess a big decision I made while at business school was that my 30s should be about learning and not earning. And that's difficult at a place like HBS because you have a lot of guys punching pretty big tickets with like pretty high profile jobs leaving and doing lots of interesting stuff, but that tends to be in pretty conventional paths. So to go my own way was a little bit of a challenge, but I really tried to focus for the 2 years I was at school on what I wanted to learn rather than how much I could earn. And those three questions really were focused on emerging markets, just because I have a personal belief that a lot of the growth in our career, sort of call it in the next 20 to 40 years, is going to be in emerging markets. And I was particularly drawn to Africa because I feel like it has the potential to be like Asia was from sort of 1970 to now. Africa has a good chance of being something similar over the course of our career. So I wanted to focus in emerging markets. I felt like more was happening. It was more vibrant, more full of opportunity, a lot of volatility too. We'll probably touch on that later, but a lot of appetite. And then also just social enterprise or impact investing. I think there's no household names that have made exceedingly huge impact at high profit to the point where they've become a household name. There's a lot, like when you think of tech stock, you think of Apple. When you think of an industrial stock, you think of GE or whatever. But when you think of someone who's proven this like sort of new, more inclusive form of capitalism and sort of capitalism 2.0 that might address the sort of rampant inequality that's building in the world, there's no household name when you think of someone who's sort of like done really, really well commercially by delivering impact either to society or to the environment at scale. There's a lot of corporations today are trying to backfill that. They're trying to like refit or retrofit their purpose to sort of creating impact, but there's no one who's really set off with like a mission first orientation and then made a really profitable business model on top of that. So that was a frontier I wanted to explore and learn more about. And then the last is just a base of the pyramid markets, which is an incredibly patronizing term, but it's what sort of poor people in poor markets or poor countries are referred to in the literature. So I was interested in business models that could serve that last mile of the economy and society. So people in sort of slum or township communities or rural communities or without sort of conventional access to ideas, to capital, to services, to products, because it represents both a compelling impact opportunity, but then on the flip side, an incredible unmet commercial opportunity. So those three things really, emerging markets, social enterprise, and sort of last mile product, service, and like idea delivery was of interest to me. And so when I had an opportunity to join up with a South African partner to build a micro business incubator, helping entrepreneurs in townships start and scale their businesses. And on the back of that, we built a township venture fund, which evolved into sort of an impact private equity fund down here in South Africa. it wasn't any of those things at the time, but when I had the opportunity to get involved in that, to me, it hit all of those criteria in one shot. And so I bought a plane ticket to Joburg for a weekend to meet the guy who would end up becoming my business partner. We hit it off. This was 2 weeks before graduating. I flew back to Boston, graduated, and then threw my stuff in a duffel bag and was back a week later. And that was 8 years ago. So that's the story.
Awesome. And so Suneel, you had quite a different experience. You mentioned earlier that you'd spent some time in London, and then I believe you were in Toronto for a while after that. And then subsequently Abu Dhabi and now Dubai, if I'm not mistaken. So can you tell us how and why you ended up where you're at?
Sure. I'd always wanted, I think after university and law school, I'd always had an itch to think about, after having, a few years before that lived in London for a while and in a new place and super cosmopolitan, had always thought I'd like to go back to a similar type of place, or a place where I can have connectivity to other markets, and much like Rob, very, very fascinated with emerging markets. Just the idea of building in different places of the world that were relatively untouched. And, emerging markets is a fairly grandiose term, and there's, different kind of verticals within that. But, looking for a place where I could do that, work in emerging markets, live in a place that's cosmopolitan, obviously, nice lifestyle would be great as well. And so, wanted to, was thinking about, places like Singapore, like Hong Kong, and Dubai, of course. Ultimately settled on moving to Dubai, just because Dubai is unique in that it's literally from a geography standpoint in the center of the world, and 4 to 6 hours away from some of the biggest emerging market financial centers globally. And so just liked the opportunity to access other opportunities in different places while still living in a place that felt comfortable to me. And so, came out here in 2011, started as a lawyer working for Allen Overy, doing corporate finance, private equity, then joined Abu Dhabi Investment Council 2 or 3 years later, which is one of the biggest, sovereign wealth funds in the world. Had started to do some angel investing on the VC side personally, but then, was quite lucky working at a place like Attic and having access. We were LPs or investors in all of the biggest funds in the world, Sequoia, Andreessen, Matrix, you name it. We were essentially investors. So I was able to plug into those networks, in a way that most people in the region couldn't, not living in San Francisco or the Bay Area. And then, really the excitement and the drive around venture capital started to build. And 4.5 years later, spun out, joined 3 of my co-founders and started our firm VentureSouq here, which is now, an early stage VC manager, focused. We have a large part of our portfolios in the US, but also have invested in places like, Sub-Saharan Africa, India, Asia, and, LATAM. And so, really, really focused on emerging markets for many of the reasons Rob mentioned. But that, that was a driving force, and obviously pre-COVID, and not including the travel restrictions and whatnot, was able to fly to a lot of these places very quickly. Like, before this, I'd be in India, once a month, fly to places like Kenya fairly regularly as well, and kind of jump around. And so Dubai was really, really appealing to me from that standpoint. Plus, just in my view, at least, a fairly cool place to live.
Okay, so you both of you guys are in emerging markets, MENA, Africa space. Curious in that the business models that you guys are seeing succeed in these markets, whether or not it's say copycats or highly influenced by business models and startups that you see that are winning in more traditional innovation centers like Silicon Valley or Beijing or London or Tel Aviv or something, or is it more, are you seeing kind of a homegrown innovation or class of, say, entrepreneurs that are starting things from scratch, specific for the region? Maybe Suneel, you can touch on that.
Sure. I think it really depends on the emerging market. So, I and our firm are fairly active in India, which is obviously a massive country with a fairly large economy. And so, places like India, like China, certain markets in LATAM, and of course, places in Africa as well, depending on the country, are large enough to have local problems that really copycats don't necessarily work without a localized solution. So, we've seen it predominantly in larger markets like India, where copycats of course work, but they have to be localized. But I think obviously you've got organic entrepreneurs that are, and you've got your own ecosystem. So a place like Bangalore or Beijing or other places are just as active and vibrant as or getting close to what a Silicon Valley ecosystem would look like. And so obviously, anyone who says, oh, copycats don't work is lying in VC, because a lot of them have worked everywhere else. But they always, in my view, the good ones have to be localized. And you've got, that's where like local founders come into, you don't usually see a transplant of someone who's got no experience in a particular market, simply just picking up, leaving, and being an entrepreneur, not really understanding that market really well, or having a local partner on the entrepreneur side, not on the investor side. And so, to my mind, everything has got to be customized. And so, and you see it all, we're a perfect example here in the Middle East. You have Uber that was here, but really 6 months before that, we had a local competitor called Careem, which started, and really most people at the time, were like, oh, they'll never be able to compete against Uber. And they ultimately started delivering localized services that Uber didn't even think of, because they're in 50 other markets, and ultimately essentially forced Uber to buy them, for a couple $2 billion, last year. And so the local story in emerging markets works, particularly on consumer businesses. I find B2B businesses can move across borders fairly fast, but consumer businesses, it's difficult from a regulatory standpoint, from a product market fit and understanding your customer perspective as well. And so we're big fans of local entrepreneurs that might have gone to great schools and spent some time in San Francisco or spent some time in other markets, but you take kids from a place like Bangalore and India, and they go to IIT, and they're just as sharp and they're just as capable, and they're building local solutions for local problems, which is where we really focus on.
Okay, very interesting. And Rob, sitting in Johannesburg, also kind of a regional center for Southern Africa, certainly. Would you say you're having a similar experience, or you're seeing a similar experience? Obviously, within your context and being slightly different, more on the social impact investing. Maybe focus on that. Is it models that are homegrown in that specific space, or is it things that are you seeing entrepreneurs bringing ideas from abroad?
Yeah, so I think it's both. To Suneel's point, I think there's no question the sort of copy paste into another geography works with some localized tweaking. So that idea arbitrage is alive and well over here. It's happening all the time. I think though the more interesting stuff is the local ideas that are being developed and commercialized in big local markets. But I think if I were to add one thing that's a nuance that has got me pretty excited, is also the potential for emerging markets to do what's called like reverse innovation, or that's in effect where they create such a compelling idea that they get then copy pasted into developed markets. So that's like where, for example, an Africa fintech solution like mobile payments and like currency through cell phones and SMSs, or WhatsApp currency, makes North American banking infrastructure look like it's from the 1970s, right? So, but like a funny anecdote, I had a check that my dad needed to deposit for me in Vancouver like last month, and living in Africa now for 10 years, like I haven't touched cash in 6 or 7 years, just because banking here is so much ahead because of the innovation it had to do locally. It had to get around cash because people couldn't get it. There was no ATM infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So you have huge startups here that have really changed the game in financial services as one sort of vertical example. But in time, I actually envision, ironically, there will be entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley that say, you know what, like US financial services are archaic. Why don't we copy paste what they did in Africa and bring it back to the US? So I think, that's just one random anecdote. But that's almost like your first idea in reverse, right? So it's like guys are copy pasting stuff from North America to here. They're developing their own stuff, but then some of that stuff that's been developed here will actually leapfrog what's back home.
Interesting. Okay, so maybe just, we're looking at the time here, we'll kind of wrap up in terms of work experience a little bit. So maybe something we could have a little bit more fun with. We'll start with you, Rob. So in your experience, like it doesn't just have to be recently in your past 8 years in Johannesburg. It could have been in your previous life back in Canada, and could have been at B school. What was the worst business plan pitch or that you've ever experienced?
So honestly, I have to say there's too many to count. And unfortunately, it's because of my experience running the micro incubator that I mentioned, working with township entrepreneurs. For context, we worked with 3,000 entrepreneurs over about 5 years. But that 3,000 came from a little over 100,000 applicants. So we saw, and by the way, working with entrepreneurs who may have not got through high school, or there's just the delivery of education in all these communities is really spotty at best. You have teachers that didn't even finish high school themselves that don't show up, etc. Lights that aren't on, power that doesn't work, no connectivity, etc., etc. So people are sort of a function of their own circumstances oftentimes. But some of the ideas there were not just bad; they were actually disheartening because of how just sort of unsound the concepts were. It was almost more sad and difficult to listen to than it was like funny and like moronic. Kind of like you might laugh someone off Dragon's Den or Shark Tank or whatever. It's different when you're exposed to tens of thousands of people that couldn't do any better despite best efforts.
Okay, yeah, I think a lot of people, maybe their view of venture capital might be a little bit tainted by the dragons and the way that things are that things are kind of glorified in that respect. Maybe over to you, Suneel, in terms of maybe flip the script on that. And have you ever had a pitch or something or an opportunity presented to you? And again, this doesn't necessarily have to be within the context of Venture Soup, that you missed out on, that is always in the back. It's the one that got away that you wish that you had got to participate in for one reason or the other.
Yeah, sure. No, the company I mentioned before, Kareem, we didn't get, I don't think, a good enough look at it because we were just starting our firm around that time. So it, kind of very, very much passed through, our hands. I feel like if we had started our company 3-6 months before that, we would have had a legitimate shot at getting in very, very early into that deal. But, just through timing and also really, what I was talking about before is that, that's where that belief in local entrepreneurs and with local solutions for local problems came. It's like, everyone, and this, that really, was part of how we formed our very, very quick judgment on that. Wish we had more time. But was like, oh, these guys will never be able to compete with, these guys are competing against the best founders in the world. They'll never compete against Uber. How's that going to work? And just kind of almost being a little dismissive of the opportunity, not believing in, guys on the ground, super well educated as well, that, made a go of it. And also came up with really a customized solution that Uber just never even thought about in a lot of different ways they deliver their business. So, that's one that I wish we could do again and have obviously, another crack at it. Timing just didn't work out really well for us, but that definitely, sticks to my mind. But it also, turning it into positive forms our thesis around how we look at businesses now, which hopefully will, pay off.
Okay, well, interesting. And, I know we're going to have, I believe, one of the classes at Vancouver College. I don't know if they're participating today, but certainly going to be watching the video. I think that's a good lesson for them to know that, you know, if you're thinking about being an entrepreneur or tackling a problem that, you know, if there's big incumbents in the space or existing companies, that's not necessarily a roadblock to creating something that is lasting and valuable. Okay, I think we're getting a little bit tight on time. Just curious from, you know, my own experience and in experiences of friends and family that have been expats, for people that are interested in the experience of going and living abroad, it's certainly we've touched on the you know, the excitement of kind of the sense of adventure, and also there's, you know, certainly work opportunities that you wouldn't see, say, in Vancouver. But that's also taxing on your family and your personal relationships. So I know you guys have young families, and I'm curious, you know, has it been difficult, and do you see challenges in terms of raising a family in Johannesburg or Dubai? Maybe Rob, will start with you.
Yeah, I think so. There's unquestionably challenges. I'd say there's pros on one level. I mean, here, as a random example, the cost of childcare is exceedingly low compared to Vancouver. So that's great. You know, we get an incredible nanny for a fraction of the price that you'd have to pay in Vancouver. That's getting like deeply practical for any parents on the call. You probably appreciate it. You can imagine a 17-year-old VC student not caring much about that dynamic, but there's also, you know, what adventure, I mean, what you do on a weekend trip, you take your kids on safari, like out, you know, 2-hour drive away, it's like lions. So, you know, that's cool. But I'd say there's a lot of cons. I mean, South Africa is not a particularly safe country from a violent crime perspective. And it's also a dramatically unequal country and still deeply racist on structural grounds. There's still a lot of like segregated living, segregated transport. You know, despite being a democratic, non-racial country now, there's still just a lot of that stuff left over from the apartheid era. So I always lose a bit of sleep around, you know, what's it like for a toddler or a young child just by osmosis downloading that as normal compared to say an upbringing in Vancouver. So it's something that wears on my mind for sure.
Okay, Suneel, being in Dubai, I'm curious, actually, maybe reframe the question a little bit. Both of you guys made comments about some of the participants on this call being able to figure out Zoom, et cetera. Maybe it's, you know, difficult staying in touch and getting in touch with people, let's say. Suneel, when you made the decision to move abroad, did you find that it was supported by your friends and family out here, or were people questioning your decision, or was it easy to make from that kind of social and family standpoint?
Yeah, it was. I was living in Toronto at the time, and my folks are in Vancouver, so I was already, you know, living, you know, in a different city than them. You know, I think I think the problem, you know, with the Middle East is always the stigma, and folks not really knowing what kind of life is for. Obviously, we're, you know, a few hours away from some hot spots, definitely, but you know, there was a lot of questions because of a lack of understanding of what Dubai is compared to other places in the region. May not have as good of a reputation, and so I think there was a little you know, concern about that. But I think once people definitely came and visited, once my folks came to visit, once my friends came to visit Dubai, you know, most of them wanted to move here. So particularly when you're coming here in January, February, where it's 20. So you know, like, so I think no, it was you know, I think it was, you know, and a lot of my family in particular knew that, you know, I really wanted to kind of go abroad and live in an emerging market, and you know, see that part of the world. And so I think they understood for the most part. But you know, it's you know, I think you know, one of the main challenges of living out here is just you are very far, you know, you're far away from close family. And so particularly now in a time like COVID, where, you know, before all of this, you know that you can hop on a flight, and we travel a lot. You know, we're in North America, or at least I am for work, and then I always add, you know, a trip up to see my folks and my brother in Toronto. You know, I'm in North America 10, 11 times a year, at least. And so now with this kind of with travel restrictions and everything, knowing you can't go see them, even though you might not have taken that trip necessarily, I think weighs on you a little bit, you know, particularly with older parents and all this going on. So, but, you know, notwithstanding that, I think it was generally pretty well accepted amongst my friends and family.
Okay, so you touched a little bit, obviously, with you know, the world we're living in now is dominated by COVID-19. I know that my firm, we have colleagues in South Africa, and it's been a pretty aggressive lockdown in South Africa. Rob, curious to understand a little bit about kind of what your quarantine experience was like, or is like, I should say.
Yeah.
And
nice correction.
Yeah, and maybe in that context, has the kind of quarantine and the experience under COVID-19 living in Johannesburg kind of changed your thoughts about living abroad, or you know, are you reconsidering maybe coming back to Canada or somewhere else?
I don't think COVID in particular has forced a change of mind. I think you know, it truly is a global pandemic, and so in that sense, you kind of see it everywhere, and just hunker down where you are. So that being said, I have been reevaluating where I'm living for a bunch of other reasons beyond COVID. In fact, I was back in Vancouver in September last year, and actually had coffee with Steve talking about some of those other reasons, even pre-COVID-19. So not necessarily changing my mind in that respect, but yeah, lockdown here has been pretty heavy. The government got way ahead of it and instituted a pretty heavy-handed lockdown here, but understandable given the situation with the high prevalence of comorbidity here. There's still super high prevalence of HIV, tuberculosis, and then because the population is still so poor and sort of unequal in large part, there's just you know, prevalence of like malnutrition, diabetes, heart disease, etc. So there's so many other things that COVID could just be a spark for, that the government, and then there's also just transport nodes are extra clogged because there isn't much infrastructure for public transport, and people also stay. You imagine like a family of 8 or 12 sleeping in a one-room shack. The idea of social distancing, as it's conceived of over at home in Canada, is a bit laughable. So there's just so many sort of structural and circumstantial factors here that made the government be pretty strict. So it's been full. I've been over 60 days locked down in the house to get out for groceries and sort of medicine. And you know, my wife can leave to go see our gynecologist to get her scans done, but that's it. We eased lockdown slightly at the beginning of May. We can go out for a walk or leave the house to ride your bike between 6 and 9 in the morning. But that's you know, you're in a bad spot when that feels like freedom. So it's still no sign of letting up here. So it's pretty intense.
Well, yeah, good luck with that, and stay strong. It's a pretty crazy situation down there, from what I've understood.
Definitely.
All right. Well, we're running out of time pretty quickly, so I think we're going to put it. We got some questions from the audience that Steve will put to you guys now. Thanks for your time, guys.
Yeah, thanks, guys. It's been great. I've got a handful of questions. They are a little bit all over the map, as you can imagine, because people are typing them in as you're talking about stuff from 20 minutes ago. And I'll do a couple rapid fire ones. So here's a quick one for both of you. Do you guys see any Vancouver College alumni in Johannesburg or Dubai, like hang out with anybody that also is there?
Yeah, we hang out with Rogers a lot. I see Mr. Rogers is on the chat as well. Actually, Mr. Rogers is actually at my house for Christmas about 5 months ago. So here to so yeah, we see we hang out with the Rogers a lot.
Nice. How about you, Rob? Is there anybody over there?
Yeah, no, nothing on my side. No one's down here.
No. Okay. Next one is
I settle for WhatsApp banter.
Cool. Next one, on both fronts, do you guys speak any of the local languages? Have you had to learn any of it? There we go, Rob first.
Yeah, I've picked up a little basic Zulu, conversational pleasantries and stuff.
I have not picked up much Arabic. You know, Dubai, it's pretty much English. Yeah, you know, English is pretty dominant here, particularly everywhere, really. You know, I think a lot of people forget, you know, Dubai is about 85% expats and 15% locals. So, you know, there's a lot of people from a lot of different places here. So everyone tends to generally gravitate towards English. So haven't felt like I've needed to, but it's probably something I should have done. Didn't know I was going to be here this long.
How it always works. Here's another question Sean Martinez asked, I think, would you come back to Vancouver? When do you think you would come back? Maybe start with you, Suneel.
Yeah, if I could ever afford a house there, probably. But you know, Vancouver's. Vancouver's.
Should have invested in Kareem.
Yeah, I know. No, I haven't thought. You know, obviously Vancouver's home. You know, I was born and raised there, but you know, we're pretty happy here in Dubai, particularly given, you know, the business which we run from here. So no immediate plans, but you never know.
Cool. What about you, Rob? Are you there for a while? Any Vancouver plans ever?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, in a lot more detail, that's a loaded question and been thinking about it quite a bit lately. I think realistically, not Joburg forever, probably got like 2 to max 3 years left here. And then it'll be something closer to home, but probably not all the way back to Canada, looking at London primarily. So my wife's from Cape Town, from down here. So London is I know it sounds crazy as a middle ground because it's still a sort of 10 or 11 hour flight each way, but it would be a nice middle ground for both families.
Cool. Marco Goko asked, how has the COVID affected the venture capitalist sector, investor appetite? What do you guys think about the post-COVID new economy? Maybe Rob go first.
Sure. I think in different ways and sort of different sectors, I think in general, there is some hesitation and sort of reticence to cut checks right now, but also the nature of VC is that they're very sort of medium and long-term bets. So guys are trying to think beyond it. But in that sense, the world is a little uncertain. So I would say where things are actively taking off and still very, very busy is where businesses actually respond well to COVID. I take that soundbite in context, but there are some businesses that are sort of not only resilient but scale in this new world, and so those businesses are receiving a lot of attention, as hot and sort of active as ever. There's other businesses that are immune to it or sort of resilient to its effects and sort of are clipping along anyway. But then businesses, you know, that are, you know, if you're looking to like launch a new hotel chain, you're going to struggle.
Yeah, probably a bad idea. All right, so just in context of time here, I think we can do one more. But before I do that, I'm going to mention we do have a couple of these webinars coming up. So the next one is next week with Mike Parker, who's a VC grad of '89, Silicon Valley guy. And then after that, a week after that, is Dax Da Silva, the founder of Lightspeed, public company. So if you guys want to check that out, everybody that's registered will get the email about that. But sort of wrapping up with a bit of a message. So the grads of 2020 are having a bit of an off year as far as everything, and their whole grad and everything seems to be very different. I guess the good thing is all of the grads of 2020 from every school everywhere seem to have a bit of a different story. But if you guys could give advice to the grads of 2020, what would that be? Maybe Suneel, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of something similar we tell particularly our early stage founders. It's that, look, we'll get through this. It's a small blip in what will be an otherwise you know, long life and career. So you know, don't get too down about it. I know it's hard. You know, you can't go to grad and do a bunch of other stuff when you're young, 17, 18. But you know, this will pass, and there's you know, a whole life out there ahead of you. So don't worry about it too much.
Nice. Rob, take us home. Advice to 2020 grads.
Oh, That's a tough one on the spot. I guess, yeah, maybe just to echo Suneel, it would be to just try to anticipate the hindsight you'll have 5 or 10 years from now when things have moved on and normalized and lessons have been learned from this thing. You'll be better, stronger, and more resilient for it in your career and as a person. So try to anticipate what those lessons will be now and take some comfort in them.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for doing this. I'd also like to point out that I thought it was interesting that Aidan's never met Rob till this call, and Suneel never met Rob till this call. So thank you guys for doing this. I appreciate it. Glad we could make all the time zones work. Thank you for everybody for registering. Like I said, the funds are going to go to 2 VC restaurants, Heirloom and oh my gosh, I forgot the other one. Pink Elephant, Thai. Anyways, thank you all. And this has been recorded and we will send it out. But yeah, thanks everybody for attending.
Thanks for coordinating, Steve. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Aidan.
Ciao, guys.
See you guys.